Good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to see and to welcome you all here today. I'm Lesley Kaplan, and welcome to the Israel Networking Hub. Many of you are very familiar with our events. We run in person as well as online events, and I'm so excited to welcome you here today to this amazing session where we're going to be talking about podcasting, storytelling, branding, and business growth. What's super exciting for me this time is that it's not that the Israel Networking Hub is running this event on our own this time, but we're partnering with our friends from Israel Story. So many of you may know what Israel Story is. Israel Story is an award-winning podcast, also known as סיפור Yisraeli in Hebrew, and they've been dubbed as the Israeli version of the American life. What they do is that they feature, and they have amazing podcasts and stories where they feature in their words extraordinary tales about ordinary individuals, and individuals in Israel. So you can hear a little bit more about it later. And with my partners today, I'm delighted to introduce our co-speakers, but also our team from Israel Story, and I'll introduce them to you in just a moment. Before I do so, I'd like to just tell you how we run. So we're going to be having the awesome Zev Levi, who many of you met him at the Jerusalem Business Conference. He's fabulous with his wonderful Aussie accent. I love the Aussie accent. So Zev, good morning. Also, good morning to Liat Tobi, who I'll introduce in just a moment from Israel Story. She's not going to be speaking, but she and I planned this entire event as well as Zev. So great to have you here. So we're going to be running through. First, I'll just be spotlighting the team from Israel Story. Then we're going to be having an amazing session with Zev, lots of information, tips, packed with stuff that you need to know, whether you're an experienced podcaster or whether you are new to podcasting. So Zev, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very
met
much for having us.
We've met in person at the
We
conference.
have.
And you blew
We're,
us away. You were fantastic. So I'm so happy that we're doing this. Just give
Thank you very much.
a little bit about you, what you do at Israel Story, then we'll
Sure.
introduce Liat, and we can take it away.
With absolute pleasure. Mishy's also here, if
Great.
and when you're
Yes. Okay. I
ready.
couldn't yet see if he was here. I was actually about to click on the participants thing to see if he had come in yet.
He's here. My name is Zev Levi. I'm originally from Australia. I've been in Israel for about 10 years now. My role at Israel Story is managing producer. I'm the COO. That means that, I started 9 years ago as an intern. I learned the production side of it, making podcasts, how to record, how to edit, how to improve, how to push it out into the world once you have a thing. And as Israel Story expands into several podcasts, I oversee them. So I am the podcast guy at Israel Story.
Great. So welcome to Mishi. I'm delighted to meet you as well. Heard so much about you, seen so much about you. Mishi is one of the co-founders of Israel Story. He's a host, he's a senior producer. Mishi, a couple of words from you.
Sure. So lovely to be with you today. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And just to say that 15 years ago, as I was finishing up my PhD in a completely esoteric realm of historical studies, I founded Israel Story with three of my closest childhood friends and have since been on an unexpected journey, which has really expanded my understanding of my own country in ways that I never anticipated or thought were possible. And I strongly believe, and perhaps many of you do as well, that there's never been a moment in which telling a new story about Israel, both internationally and internally to ourselves, has been more crucial than today. And as such, we have been working in various different mediums, and of course, primarily in the world of podcasts, to try to tell complicated human interest stories that defy stereotypes and that try to give people around the world and here a sense of the vibrancy of Israeli society. The absolute best thing that ever happened to me in the last 15 years professionally is that I received a call 10 years ago from somebody who said, I'm a 30-year-old new immigrant from Australia, and I have decided together with my wife that I want to quit my well-paying job and become an unpaid intern at Israel Story. And though I have a child, and I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes, I'm absolutely sure. I see this as my shlichut and as what I want to be doing in life." And that person was Zev, who a decade later, as he just said, runs our entire operation and is really my partner in everything that we do in life professionally. So I unfortunately have to jump off, but I leave you with the absolute best podcaster that I know, Zev Levi.
Amazing, fantastic. And Zev, respect. After hearing that story, I had a lot of respect for you before. It's gone up even more.
Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Welcome. Well, thank you, Mishi. So delighted to meet you and keep up the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. I'm now replacing you with Liat, who is dealing with marketing development, and that's who a lot of my contact has been with for putting this event together. Good morning, Liat. A couple of words before we move on to Zev.
Hi, good morning. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So my name's Liat. I am originally from London. I spent a few years in the south where I did mainly marketing and business development, and then I got the great opportunity of coming to Jerusalem and found Israel Story and joined the team and the world of podcasting, which is amazing and it's only growing. And thank you so much for this opportunity and this collaboration. Let's start podcasting.
Yeah, exactly. Phenomenal. All right, Zev, the floor is yours. Take it away. This is what we are here for.
Thank you very much. Amazing. So I'm going to start off with a little preface about podcasts. The big three platforms that people use to listen to podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Okay? If people have more questions about that side of it, amazing. I'm happy to go into it. I'm going to be dealing with the next stage, mostly the podcast that builds an audience, right? I don't have the ability to see everyone's faces at the moment, but I am keen to know, maybe drop in the chat, if you listen to podcasts, if you're involved in the world, because what I want you to start doing is not necessarily listening to more podcasts, but listen a little more critically. When you listen, I want you to notice what would make you want to keep listening to the same episode, what would make you want to come back to that show, listen to a different episode, because what we're talking about now is the difference between podcasts that might be interesting and one episode might get, I don't know, 1 million listens, but the next episode might get 10, 20, right? What we want to do is create the episode or create the style of episode that moves us from one really, really good and interesting and popular podcast to recurring and returning listeners and engaged audience. Okay, with that, I'm going to share my screen. What we're going to be talking about is I'm going to address the following. First is understanding what type of tool a podcast is, as opposed to the other tools in your arsenal. I'm assuming that we're talking about growing a small business or a business that you run. And why is a podcast relevant as opposed to a newsletter or, I don't know, weekly meetings where all of your clients and customers meet in your warehouse or office. And we're going to talk about what separates an episode that gets listened to once from one that builds an audience. this is directly related to identifying your brand's identity. Again, I'm assuming that most people here already have an idea of what their brand's identity is. If not, we're going to ask a few simple questions that everyone needs to answer in order to understand what the voice is of the podcast. Not the physical voice, but the type of things that you push for. Now, I'm assuming because most people have listened to podcasts, there are several types of podcasts. Often today, there are conversations where a single host will interview a rotating carousel of guests about whatever subject that they're interested in pushing, which means that your podcast is somewhat in the hands of some stranger, right? There are specific things to keep in mind and specific questions that I want you to be asking in order to make sure that you have control over the type of content that you deliver to your listeners. How to translate that brand identity into a compelling podcast voice. I'm going to I'm going to lift up the curtain ever so slightly. My answer is stories. Okay, we're going to talk about what a story is and why story is the difference between a podcast that is interesting and an audience that regularly follows a show. And lastly, how to create clarity, consistency, and trust, the foundations of a following. I'm going to get stuck right into it. Okay, firstly, everything in the podcast world that I say or that anyone says, there is going to be a podcast out there that does the exact opposite thing. It's just a marketplace. What I am suggesting and delivering here for my, 30 odd years of audio experience and 10 years of podcast experience is the best chance that your podcast has for success. You can ignore the stuff that I say. However, it's going to be a lot harder for you if you do. So the first thing to keep in mind is podcasts are optional. They are not homework, and anyone who is listening has the opportunity at any point to just turn off and go somewhere else. And there are some podcasts who spend a lot of time making the case that actually this podcast is not optional. Actually, if you miss out on this information or don't hear this, then something drastic will happen or your life will, change in some negative way. And the thing to keep in mind is that's an uphill battle because you don't hear the responses. Your listeners are choosing to listen to you and therefore at any point could say, you know what, no thank you. Which means every podcast has to be engaging. To do that, I have a kind of list of pet peeves that I'll often speak about in terms of podcasts. And one of them is the listener has to feel like you respect their time. The way that they do that is I often do it via editing, by cutting out the bits that are not relevant to them. But they need to know that you haven't just rocked up onto the podcast and say you're listening to me for an hour. And so I'm just going to talk about whatever it is that comes up in my mind. And it's so endlessly interesting. You need to be engaging and it's not always, happy and it's not always funny and it's not always fun, but you need to be engaging. Again, we'll talk about story and how a story is the shortest path, I think, to being engaging. Normally in my conversations when we're face-to-face, I'll ask questions at each of these stages, like, does anybody know what parasocial means? In this instance, I'm just going to tell you, and I apologize if you already know. You, in the listener's mind, have a personal relationship with them and them you, right? Because it's so intimate. People are putting you in their earbuds. People tend to not listen to podcasts on speakers in groups. It's not a social thing. The social aspect of podcasting is experiencing it by yourself, and then communicating with other people who have also had that individual experience. But parasocial means that to the listener, you are friends. To the listener, you have, very, very close contact, and they're like, you're right in their ears. You're sitting with them. You're with them in their intimate moments as they are washing the dishes or driving to work, or like you and them have a little secret that that they're listening to the things that you say or whispering to them while they're exercising or whatever it is, right? However, on your side, you have no idea who these people are. And that's what makes it parasocial. That from their perspective, this is a friendship and you have never heard of them. That's something to keep in mind when you develop the voice for your podcast, when you develop and how to like think of your listener and how to treat them, because they are having this really intimate social experience. The last thing that I'll say is, especially in my circles, I'm biased because I work in podcasting, but podcasts, like all brands, speak to our identity. Somebody will identify themselves in their list of who am I, what makes me me. They will list, I am a person that listens to this comedy podcast, this news podcast. I watch Fox News, or I read Haaretz daily, whatever it is. This speaks to the very core of how a person defines themselves. And that is something that we need to tap into in terms of our podcast. So again, a podcast in general is an optional hobby, I guess you could say. It's not something necessary that everybody has to do. So therefore, your listeners are choosing to do it. It has to be engaging, otherwise they'll stop. It is parasocial because whether they like it or not, people are developing relationships with the voices they hear. It is extremely intimate because it is done by oneself, and it speaks to our identity. It kind of goes a long way into how people define themselves. Now, what builds an audience? Well, it's the last three things. If you want an interesting episode, then all you have to do is fill it with interesting information. It doesn't have to be parasocial. It doesn't have to be particularly intimate, and it doesn't have to speak to identity. You can say, this is, the most interesting podcast episode you'll ever hear about jellyfish. Here is 100 facts about jellyfish. Okay, that's lovely. And that podcast episode can do very well, but in giving me facts, there's nothing that is going to make me return to this podcast other than maybe this person has more interesting facts, maybe not. Maybe I'm in the mood for facts and maybe I'm not. However, if you want to build an audience, if you want to build on that parasocial friendship, people coming back to that intimate relationship and people reminding themselves, I am a person who listens to this podcast, you need to tap into the parasocial nature, the intimate nature, and the identity aspect of listening to podcasts. Now, I said from the beginning that I was giving a spoiler alert. If you want parasocial and intimate relationships, that is a story. You share intimate or somewhat personal stories with people, and that will automatically build that parasocial and intimate relationship. So we're going to talk about what a story is, and this is why it's useful. You want people to come back because this is who they see themselves as, and this is part of a relationship, much more than just a source of information. Stories are the way to do that. As for speaking to what my identity is, that is what I would attribute to the branding aspect of each, what you need to keep in mind as you steer any conversation in your podcast, and how you how you choose what to talk about. Okay. Again, forgive me if everyone has already identified their brand's identity, knows what their brand story is. I'm going to get stuck into it. And I do believe that even people who have already thought about these topics can get something really, really beneficial from answering these questions. Okay, what I want everyone to do before they leave this Zoom session is understand specifically, write down and articulate what the 2 to 5 words are that are your brand identity. Okay? Nike and Apple, apologies to those who believe it's pronounced Nike, they're not objectively the best options, right? Nike make very nice shoes and sportswear, and I'm sure they make nice basketballs, but they have a lot of competition, and there's nothing to say like, oh, they're as popular as they are because they're the best. Likewise with Apple, right? Apple computers and phones, they're very, very popular, and they're the most popular, but they're not objectively the best because they don't sell themselves as the best option. They sell themselves as part of this brand. Nike sells itself as a part of athletic excellence. You don't buy Nike because you want nice shoes. You buy Nike because your identity, how you want to see yourself is, I am someone who strives for athletic excellence. You don't buy Apple because, I don't know, the camera is better than the Google phone. You buy it because it's cool. It's useful, smooth, cool technology. Okay? Those words are really, really essential in determining what type of thing you're going to speak about on your podcast, how how to, like, that's going to direct you as you guide the conversations or the topics of your podcast. The famous quote from Loretta Lynn is, you have to be the first, the best, or different, right? Israel Story, the podcast that I have worked for 9 years, very, very happily, is extremely lucky because in some ways we were the first. I mean, This American Life was the first. Let's not make no bones about it, right? They made documentaries about everyday people that had this really emotional appeal, okay? Israel Story was the first podcast, radio show, project to do that in Israel. And in that way, we were the first, and we have a lot of followers as a result of that. The next organization to try and cover that same niche, we're very lucky in that people haven't done that. The next organization who want to become the podcast about, Israelis and people in Israel needs to either be better than us, they need to be produced at a higher level, or somewhat different. They need to have some other focus. While you come up with your 2 to 5 words of what your brand identity is, you need to think about, am I the first religious Jewish shoe salesman? I don't know why. Am I the best religious Jewish shoe salesman, or am I somehow different from all other religious Jewish shoe salespeople? Because that that will inform what our stories need to be about, what the podcast needs to cover. In general, I would give time here. So, like, everyone take 5 minutes so that you can brainstorm and think about what your 2 to 5 words of brand identity are. I'm not going to do that now, but I strongly, strongly recommend that you do. I'm going to keep talking. That will, once we have it, identify exactly what our podcast needs to be about. Trained is Nike's podcast. Guess what? It's not about shoes. It is not about, how to get the cheapest but high functioning, material for basketball shorts. The reason people listen to Trained is that it speaks to and it gives new hints and tips and tricks every single episode that are different about, what did we say? It was athletic excellence. Okay, that's their focus. They don't speak about the thing they do. They speak about their brand identity. So if your small business is selling shoes, I don't think your podcast is going to be about shoes. I think if you want a podcast following, it needs to be about structure, support, what your brand identity speaks to. If it's, religious, again, the uniqueness of your brand. So if it's the religious Jewish approach to physical support, great, terrific. You're going to find your audience by speaking to identity and not the details of what you actually do. So you need to answer, why would someone want to listen to your podcast? And by doing that, you're going to tap into your brand identity that we were just speaking about. Okay, the way to do that is to break down your brand identity. So you have 2 to 5 words of, what am I that nobody else is? I am the religious Jewish shoe salesperson. Maybe I'm the only religious Jewish shoe salesperson, right? Break that down. So in terms of trained, they have decided their brand identity is athletic excellence, and each of their podcast episodes delves into the 5 facets of fitness. They have decided this. I don't think that's an objective description of fitness by any stretch of the imagination. They have decided, you know what fitness is? It's mindset, movement, nutrition, recovery, sleep. So we are going to interview interesting and famous people, very successful people, about what they do and what works for them about their mindset, movement, nutrition, recovery, and sleep. Each episode is going to give me real tips and real insight into one person's process. However, I'm never going to listen to a single episode and think, got it, I'm done with this topic. I have spoken to my identity as someone who's interested in athletic excellence, but rather each one is a different approach or a different insight. I want to come back again and again and again to get these really practical tips into my life. Israel Story produces a bunch of other podcasts we also consult other podcasts. So I wanted to bring another example, but one of our clients, one of the podcasts that we work on, they market themselves as they're not just a travel company, and they're not just a travel company for Jewish people. They do Jewish travel. And in speaking to them about what that means, they said, absolutely. Each of their tours, people need to grow as a traveler. They need to know more about the world. They need to experience. They also need to grow as a Jew. So there's conversations about, the sources in Tanakh. There are also conversations about, Zionist history or famous secular Jews. There's an inbuilt aspect of their travel where they go to Zurich, Budapest, Jerusalem, whatever. And they want to expose people to new things and have them question or reshape some of their personal identity as a Jewish person. And they also separately want to grow as a person. They also want to completely outside of Judaism. Each of their, tours needs to find each person at some point thinking for themselves about, like, what do I want to be for myself? What my identity? I define myself as moral. Should I give more charity? I define myself as good. Should I quit my job and do something else? These 3 things are essential for their brand in how they market themselves as different from any other travel company that, will lead tours of Jewish people from somewhere in the world to Tel Aviv and Haifa. But it also speaks directly to their podcast. why would someone listen to this podcast as opposed to any other podcast or do anything else with their time? It's because I am going to give them practical tips to grow as a traveler, to grow as a Jew, and to grow as a person in each episode. So the title of this talk was The Episode That Builds an Audience. But the truth is that it's not the case that you're going to do one podcast episode and everyone who listens to it is going to click subscribe and then you can go back to doing whatever podcast episodes you were doing before. This is something that you do once and then repeat again and again and again, because people need to be engaged with stories about their identity. Again, normally in live conversations, I'm able to read people's faces to say, like, have we all understood something? I'm assuming, because Lesley isn't jumping down my throat and saying you're just talking garbage, that everyone understands, and I'll move right along. Okay, so finally, we know that the story needs to speak to identity, but what is a story? Now, Israel Story, the show that I work on, is a narrative podcast, meaning we make documentaries. We delve right in with the character and the conflict and the resolution and all sorts. You don't need to do any of that, but you need to be aware as you're having the conversation with your guest, is this a story? Am I hitting the right points? A story is the narrative of a change. I need to know there was a personal thing. They wanted something was difficult, and they dealt with that difficulty somehow. They could succeed, they could fail, they could, actually, those are the options. They could succeed or they could fail, right? So while you're having that conversation, we were talking before about how constantly in an interview situation, you are giving the power of your podcast, audio waves, whatever it is, over to some other person. You need to be pushing, you need to be asking questions that have to do with the story. Who are you? What did you want? What was difficult about it? What were the obstacles? And what did you do about it? It doesn't matter. Again, we're talking about selling shoes, right? The company sells shoes. The podcast is about support and to create that parasocial, intimate, and identity-based conversation. You need to be pushing for, great, tell me exactly the moment something changed. You need to, I don't want to hear, over a process of years, I thought more and more about this, and it turns out that after I thought about it, I decided to quit my job. No, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the moment. I'm interested in the scene. So something I think about podcasts, and I think, I mean, obviously I think I'm right about stuff. That's why I think it. But I compare podcasts often to film. What would someone be seeing if this was a film? And that, because it's obviously, I mean, in most cases, a visual-free medium, your voice needs to be doing the hard work of, okay, this is a film and we're talking about a scene. What questions do I need to ask to bring out what people would see so that they can imagine whatever it is we're talking about? One of the reasons that podcasts are so powerful, and I mean, there are all sorts of studies that I unfortunately cannot quote that say that podcasts have a more engaging or more emotional engagement than watching film or video of the exact same story. And the reason is, if I tell you to imagine a mountain versus showing you a picture or a video of a mountain, your imagination is already personalizing and making the story or your kind of experience of the story more personal than showing you, here is some random mountain. because a podcast has no visual aspect, it's a lot more intimate because the listener's imagination is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And because the listener's imagination is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, you have to be asking questions to your interviewee so that they know what to imagine. So, story, I need to know the character, I need to know what they wanted, I need to know why it was difficult, and I need to know what they did about it. Okay. These are, the more you have of these, the stronger the story is. Okay. So if you're doing an interview conversation, an interview podcast where you're just airing conversations, you don't need all of this. The more you have, the stronger it is, which means that the listener converts from somebody who is interested in this one episode to somebody who identifies with your brand and is going to come back to your podcast again. The first thing I've already said a bunch of times. That's my thing. I repeat stuff a lot because I think it's important. The second is a hook. Okay. In general, in a podcast, you have to basically remind the listener why they're listening once every 30 to 45 seconds. Every 30 to 45 seconds, a listener is going to think to themselves, why am I listening to this again? I don't want to do this anymore, right? And the beginning is really, really important. At the beginning, you need what we call a hook, which is generally one sentence that asks some sort of question that will make the listener think, I want to invest 45 of my minutes in finding out the answer to this question. Okay? So it often is, a paraphrasing or an introduction to the story that you're about to explore. In our example of religious Jewish shoe salesperson, we're talking about a podcast that has to do with physical support. So I want to hear, this is the story of Jay, who, I don't know, underwent some sort of accident, was born with some sort of difficulty. They wanted to run a marathon. And here are the secrets that allowed them to do that, right? I need to, right at the top of the conversation, give the listener a reason to listen. Now, something that's very, very important and something that is going to come in handy, or rather something that your brand identity helps you with, is separating what's interesting versus what is interesting to you. We at Israel Story, again, we tell stories of what happens to everyday people. And so we get lots of emails every day saying, you have to tell my story. The most amazing thing happened to me. I went to the park and I sat on the swing and I had a really beautiful epiphany and I went home and I was just a better person after that. Okay. That person's parents cares a lot about that experience. That is objectively not an interesting story. Okay. So separating what is interesting versus what's only interesting to you speaks to the identity, how people want to see themselves and what people in general need as new information in order to grow in their identity. A shortcut to being interesting is emotional vulnerability. You don't need to be emotionally vulnerable, and podcasts don't need emotional vulnerability. There's a podcast called No Such Thing as a Fish, for anyone who's aware of, English, meaning from England, television. There's a wonderful TV series called QI, quite interesting, and it's comedians sharing facts. The writers for that show have a podcast where also comedians sharing facts. There's not a ton of emotional vulnerability in that, but it's so difficult to rely on persona and personality and being funny all the time and being interesting all the time. Finding enough content that is objectively interesting, right? The type of thing that they do is they've done the same fact a few times because science, develops over time. But on one of their episodes, they said, the question was, how many moons does Earth have? Somebody said 1, and they lost a point because actually Earth had 3 moons at the time. 2 of them were the size of golf balls, right? And they were just these rocks that are orbiting Earth. A few years later, they asked the same question. The person who had been on and lost the first point all those years ago was on that episode and said, aha, I know the answer to this question. It's 3. And they lost another point because at that point, science had discovered actually there were thousands of these microscopic, well, not microscopic, small rocks orbiting Earth. You don't need to be emotionally vulnerable. It is so much easier to be engaging when you talk about personal things. Human beings, by and large, have relatively similar experiences. Everybody knows what it's like to be scared. Everybody knows what it's like to be alone. Everybody knows what it's like to be, excited for something. But anytime we hear somebody else's experience of that emotion, it immediately, again, it speaks to our identity because we go back to our own memories of that feeling. So I've never, tried to hunt rabbit to feed my family, but I do know what it's like to come into a really, really good opportunity that I'm excited by. And so I'm interested in that story and I'm engaged in that podcast episode because they're being emotionally vulnerable. The people on the podcast are telling me what happened and how it felt. Something small that again is really, really important when you're interviewing in order to control your interview, your podcast, is make sure you have an and so narrative as opposed to an and then narrative. I'm assuming everyone in this call has had conversations with children before, and regardless of how cute the children are, their stories are garbage. They have terrible, terrible stories because they're just a series of events. I woke up and then it was raining and then I put my shoes on and then, it was time for breakfast and then I drew a picture, and there's just a series of unrelated events because kids have a bad sense of narrative. When you are asking your questions in your interview, when you're trying to coax out of your interviewee what you want to give your listeners a practical tip, you need to make sure that every part of the story leads to the next part of the story. And if it's just something else random that was happening at the same time, edit it out. Right? A large part of respecting the listener's time means taking out what is not relevant to this story. And I talk about it a little bit later, but that means we're turning 3-dimensional real people into 2-dimensional characters. We're saying, for the purpose of this story, you swam the English Channel. I don't need to know that your fish died. I know that at the moment that's what you were thinking about, but it's not relevant unless it is relevant, right? If it's not relevant, it's and then, and it needs to go. If it is relevant, it's and so. I was thinking about my fish, and so I, was really scared and stopped swimming halfway through and gave up. Whatever it is, right? Everything that is spoken about needs to be relevant to the brand identity. How does this show my listeners that they can, grow as a Jewish person, grow as an individual, and grow as a traveler? Okay. Don't be boring. I feel like we've covered enough how everything needs to be engaging, but don't be boring is still on the list. Okay, turning points. What we were saying before is podcasts are kind of like films that we need to kind of hold the listener's hand through, which means that, again, I don't want to hear something like over the course of 5 years, I got really into Krav Maga. I want to hear I was at, some late night bus stop and I saw somebody get mugged and I thought, that's it. I'm signing up for Krav Maga tomorrow. You want to drill into the turning points in your conversation. What changed? Drill into the scene where something changed for your interviewee. That means a better story, which means your listeners are going to be engaged. And again, the story is about your brand identity. Killing your darlings is a phrase in the writing community, which means edit. Now, I would love to speak to anyone who's interested about this and how to edit. This doesn't mean that you necessarily need to hire a podcast producer for any of your, for any of your episodes. But in my opinion, better, stronger episodes that respect the listener and therefore get the listener coming back again and again and again are ones where the listener feels that they're not being given information that is unnecessary, and that means editing happens. Editing out silence, editing out mistakes, and then editing out irrelevant bits. Again, you're in a conversation with your interviewee and they're talking about athletic excellence. All you need to be thinking about is bouncing between what happened next and how did it feel. And if you can bounce between what happened and how it felt, and then what happened and how did it feel, you're going to get through the whole story. It's all going to be relevant and it's all going to be engaging. There isn't much you need to grasp at straws. I don't know where to go from this part of the conversation, because I know I want us to be talking about giving the listener real life examples of growing as a Jewish traveler. And all I want to hear is what happened and how it felt. Okay, as I said, I think that editing is a large part of it. Now, there are some editing platforms where you can, if you record on your phone or on Zoom or on a computer, a conversation, there are some platforms that immediately you can just click, cut out all silences, cut out all the bits where somebody was yawning or thinking of what to say next. That is an option, and that does keep people somewhat engaged. The norm in podcasting, for whatever reason, is to make it seem as though, like a film, people are more articulate than human beings, which means ums and stutters and things are all taken out, but also editors hide the evidence of their edits and make it seem like two very, very smart people sat down for 20 minutes and just had a smooth conversation the entire time with no breaks and no questions that didn't really go anywhere and no mistakes. That's what has developed as the norm. It's not necessary, but it is kind of the norm in podcasting. And so if you want to engage your audience, if you want them to think, yes, I want to be listening to this podcast as opposed to some other podcast, it's worth thinking about how you want to navigate that. Every part of the conversation needs to serve the brand, needs to serve my unique voice in podcasting is Jewish travel. Every part of it is going to deal with this. I'll start from here. Podcasting as a relatively new medium lends itself easily to celebrities. People who we already recognize from stand-up comedy or radio or TV or film. And there is a lot of time in these podcasts invested in just who these people are and not what we're trying to give the audience. I'll say from my personal perspective, today in this meeting, we started with an introduction of who I am. The way my brain works, who cares? Who cares who I am? I'm someone who knows about podcasting, and that's why you should listen to me. But the fact that I'm Australian or the fact that I, live outside of Jerusalem, I understand that most people need that element, but I think a lot of podcast hosts think that they need way more of that than their listener actually needs. Keep coming back to the brand. The journey, again, a story is the journey from character A to character B. I was a person, I wanted something, something was hard, and I dealt with it. That is my journey from character A to character B. That is how you're going to engage your audience in this parasocial relationship so that they're going to come back time and time again. The condensing a real life experience into a 2D character we mentioned before, but again, it has to do with cutting out what isn't relevant to the story. We mentioned before that your audience needs a reason to keep listening, so the hook is a really strong kind of argument at the very beginning to begin your podcast, to say like, oh, you want to listen for this. But I'm sure that everyone has the experience of like those 90-minute TV specials where in the first minute they say like, what is the secret to this magic trick? Or what is the secret to this, financial coup that could make you millions? And it takes them 90 minutes where they just keep teasing it out. And then at the very end, it's generally something disappointing. But even if it isn't disappointing, you could have given that to me in a minute. You could have, you didn't need to take that long just to fill 90 minutes. That makes audiences feel disrespected. And in a world where there are millions and millions of podcasts, that isn't going to work. So if the listener feels like you are stretching it out stum just because you want to fill a certain amount of time, they're going to stop listening. They're going to not return. They're going to feel like they've lost you as part of that parasocial relationship. So the audience needs a strong hook at the beginning, but every few minutes needs to actually receive practical tips on whatever it is that their brand identity, whatever it is that you're giving them. Okay, so we've spoken about stories, we've spoken about brand identity. Now, clarity, consistency, and trust. Something, again, a practical tip that I really want anyone considering a podcast to do, I want them to do this exercise, is however it is that you're recording the interview or just speaking. If something that you write a script and you're just recording a podcast and it's just a one-person solo project, amazing. You need to be comfortable with your own voice. You need to be comfortable holding space, and you need to be comfortable with your own silence. That's why I did that little pause. And you can't, the listener, like the intimate nature of the podcast, the fact that you're right inside people's ears, means that they pick up on whatever is going on in your delivery. And so it's really important that you are comfortable with how you speak, with how fast you speak, with what you have to say. And when people get in front of a microphone for the first time, 100% of the time, even if they're used to recording voice notes and sending them off, and they're used to whatever, kind of standing in pictures and being the center of attention, a microphone is a different setup, and people get inside their own head. I don't know if you've ever seen actors as they start saying, I don't know what to do with my hands when I'm acting in a scene. And they do these very strange movements because it's unnatural to them, right? The same way your voice in your own mind will start just acting strangely, and you start thinking, what do I sound like? And how fast do I speak? And what is my voice physically? Where do I have a higher voice? Do I have a faster voice? Get comfortable with it. Before you hit record, sit in a room by yourself and listen to yourself and allow yourself the space to talk or to listen or to be. I like my voice because, because I have a very deep voice, which most people find authoritative, which means that when I speak slower, people just give me more of their attention. I don't need to chase after their attention. I just have it. I'm very, very blessed. Thank you, Hashem. Not taking that for granted. But your emotions come through really, really strongly on a podcast because people don't get confused by your visual appearance. So if you're used to being a bit nervous but looking confident, that's cool. But the question is, can you sound confident? And all of that speaks to authenticity. Okay? Know how fast you speak, how high you speak, and your own personal conversational rhythms, right? People can tell if you're reading off a script, often because the length of each sentence that you say is somewhat similar and not how normal people have conversations. Podcasts are extremely conversational. All of that speaks to authenticity. So not only your physical voice should you be comfortable with and sharing how you speak, but also the type of things you say and how you react. When someone tells a story, if you think it's funny, do you say it's funny? If you think it's like sad, what's your reaction? Do you just silently nod? Because that's not going to work on a podcast. Key to being authentic is first, be comfortable, and second, know yourself, know conversationally what role you fill. As a male with a deep voice who's had my experience being light-skinned growing up in Australia, I am used in conversations when there is a lull to filling that lull. It's probably been very, very clear. I've been speaking by myself for 40-odd minutes. I don't have a problem with continuing to just carry the conversation the whole time. That sometimes will happen with your interviewee. Know how you're going to react. Know what you do. You can always edit. Anything you don't like about a recording, you can always take it out. You can record a conversation and decide not to air it. That is your choice. You don't owe your interviewee airing their conversation. They might have questions and they might be disappointed, and that's fair, but you are in control. And so know what your personal podcast voice is. In terms of clarity, consistency, and trust, authenticity, we covered. The second is the podcast norm is generally to be released, is generally a new episode weekly. Some podcasts push that to fortnightly, once every 2 weeks. More spread out than that. There isn't much momentum in terms of podcast listens. So even if, 100,000 people click, I'm subscribed to this podcast, if you look at the actual listens of each podcast, if it's been more than 2 weeks since the previous podcast, there's not going to be much of a knock-on effect, not much momentum that a listener will say, oh yeah, recently I listened to this podcast and I really enjoyed it. I'm going to listen to another episode. If you find yourself in a case where releasing fortnightly is not an option, then what I would recommend is instead releasing like series or mini-series, which means I'm going to record 10 interviews, conversations, solo podcasts. I'm going to prepare 10 of them. I'm going to release them all on one day, or even each one, the day after the previous one. And I'm going to call that a season. And in my social media posts, in my newsletter, when I talk about my podcast, I'm going to make it very clear that this is not a regular recurring podcast, but instead this is seasonal. So once a year, I'm going to release 10 episodes. And that way, the momentum that your listeners will kind of expect or have from episode to episode is going to be understood from the outset. But it's not as if they'll be constantly surprised to see you in their feed or wondering, okay, it's been 4 weeks. I thought you were doing this. Are you doing this podcast anymore? I would go either fortnightly or via seasons. The point of podcasts is engagement. You want these people to identify with your brand, not so that they identify with your brand, but so that they give you money and, advertise on your behalf, or you want that ongoing engagement, which means that every single podcast needs to end with an action item. You need to tell them one specific thing that you want them to do. If it's sign up for our newsletter, if it's jump on our social media and kind of follow us, if it's send this episode to 3 people that you think might like it, whatever it is, you need to give them something to do so that they're in the height of their, wow, I identify with this show and this brand. I feel like I'm speaking to my people here. You give them an action item that they can kind of release that energy by doing something, and you can further your own interests by, spreading your message. Thank you. A brief review. We spoke about what kind of a tool is a podcast. We spoke about what separates an episode that gets listened to once from a podcast that builds an audience. We spoke about how to build your brand's identity, the 2 to 5 words that we need to identify. We spoke about how we need to translate your brand's identity into a compelling podcast voice. We spoke about what a story is. And lastly, we spoke about how to create clarity, consistency, and trust, which is all you need for a following. Over to you, Lesley. Terrific.
All righty. That was great info as a starter. If any of you would like to know in more depth and learn more about podcasting, doesn't matter whether you're experienced or whether you are a newbie to it, we're going to be partnering the Israel Networking Hub and Israel Story for a 3-session online workshop, all online, doesn't matter where you're from. So whether you're joining us live now, or whether you're watching the replay, you are welcome to join us. You can see below what the topics are. The first session will be on content, creating episodes worth listening to, where we're going to go into a lot more depth than what was mentioned today. We're going to then be talking about, in the second episode, editing and AI shaping the story. And the third session, we're going to be talking about marketing and making sure people actually hear it. Because that, from speaking to many podcast owners or podcasters, is something that's often a challenge in terms of our growth, how many people listen to it, how far they listen to in each episode. So make sure you join us. If you're not able to join live for any of these dates, it is possible that you can still register for it, and we will send you the recording. These recordings for the FD3 session will not be put on YouTube, so it'll only be sent to people that join live, or if you can't join live for all or for part of them, then you're welcome to still register and view the recording. All right, there will be a special coupon code for Israel Networking Hub Pro Circle members, and there will also be an early bird special up until this Friday at 9 a.m. For those that register, you'll be receiving details by tomorrow in your inbox with all the details. So save the dates, and it's going to be a fabulous in-depth session for those of you. And this is where you'll have direct conversation as well with the presenters to be able to ask them a lot more questions too, and specifically related to your own podcast. So talking of podcasts, many of you know that I produce the Monday Motivation Spotlight podcast, which was started as a result of October 7th. We started it literally a couple of days afterwards to give a spotlight and, as we say in Hebrew, a bama to Israeli businesses, nonprofits, or individuals making a difference in Israel, as well as to inspire us, of course, because we were going through a stage where we needed desperate inspiration. For 2 years, it was a live podcast, and now we do pre-recordings. If you haven't been a guest on my podcast and you have a story to share, if you believe that you can be motivating and inspiring to others, please send me a message at hello@lesliekaplan.com. You can check out our podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Drops every Monday. And if you haven't yet subscribed or followed, I would obviously love it if you do so. If you're not yet a member of the Israel Networking Hub, and this event is produced in collaboration with the Israel Networking Hub and Israel Story, Please join our Facebook group. It's a great place for you to stay top of mind, promote what you do. Doesn't matter if you're in the service industry or products, any day of the week. And we also have our Pro Circle community, which is a more in-depth community with special events, special discounts, special membership. It also gives you special access to Impact IL, which I'll mention in a moment. And if you would like accountability partners, that's also possible. We have a separate WhatsApp group. If you'd like to find out more about it, then you can scan the QR code or just go to my site, lesliekaplan.com, and you'll see further details. We have also exclusive for our Pro Circle members, a monthly business roundtable discussion. Our next meetup or our kickoff meetup is on March 11th. So save the date, and we look forward to seeing you on that side. Talking of Impact IL, many of you have already joined us and many of you know about it. I wanted to create impact with not just working with business owners. We also wanted to take that one step further and provide real life skills to Israel's future generation, which is vastly lacking in many, many segments. We work with different areas. Check it out. We'd love for you to join. And there are various ways that you can join and make a difference to Israel's future generation. And lastly, but not least, many of you have seen or read or purchased my business books. Some of you actually appear in one of them, in the Power Talks with Women Entrepreneurs. And of course, I have my first book, Small Business Success Toolbox and Guide. It's available via my website. If you have Kindle Scribe, you can also purchase it via Amazon as an ebook and as a paperback, and we can learn from various member stores. All right, so I'd like to hand over to Zev to just do the end part. And we do have a couple of questions that people got also message me. If you want to just answer them one after the next. One is in terms of growth, business growth, or podcast follower growth. What kind of growth should we be seeing with our followers? As we know, that's one of the challenges in actually getting our message out there. One thing we'll be addressing in the session of 3. If you want to just mention something about that. Also, in terms of listening time, yes, I know we could just type it into ChatGPT and ask, but what do you recommend in terms of listening time that is considered good? And then we did have a question about your voice. Do you know of any platform where you can use another voice as opposed to your own voice? So I'm going to spotlight you now instead of me.
Great questions. Terrific. Okay, in terms of growth to expect, it's a really, really tricky question because there isn't every podcast marketing person will be able to, after the fact, explain what happened, but never be able to predict what exactly you need to do to grow. So one very strong way to navigate that is to ask your interviewee, book interviewees who already have an independent following, and ask them, please share it on your platform as well. In that action item that you should end every podcast with, if your priority is growth, I would make that your action item. I would say, please send this to 3 people who you think are going to be interested in it, who don't already listen, or something along those lines. In terms of numbers, there isn't well, firstly, let's start here. I believe the statistic is that 99% of podcasts have less than 10 listens. So just to set expectations, if you get 11, you're doing great. It's just as important to go from 60 listens on one episode to 70 listens on the next episode than it is to go from, 1,500 to 1,550. Okay? So
let me actually ask you something. What is more important?
Please.
To have more listeners, or to know that listeners are listening to more of your episode? In other words,
Right.
that they're not just logging off after 5 minutes.
It depends what you want to do. If what you want to do is be able to brand yourself as somebody who has this many listens and try and sell adverts.
We didn't actually talk about monetizing, by the way, but that's something that we will be discussing in the 3-part series, because that's also a big challenge for many podcasters, the time that it takes to do everything and the consistency, and they're not monetizing it.
Very much so. In terms of Israel story, I'll say that it's more important for us to have meaningful listens. We would rather have hour-long listeners who kind of engage with the content, because the idea behind our show is this emotional connection. We don't sell a thing, and we're using Israel Story as a platform to sell it. The story is the product, I guess. But both are valid kind of approaches depending on what you want to do.
Right. Okay. And just two quick questions. One I already said, do you
Please.
know the platform if somebody doesn't want to use their own voice?
Yeah, so we're talking about AI, like putting text into a platform and it generating a voice for it. I'm assuming that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. If they don't want their own
Terrific.
voice to be heard, or if you want to change your accent or something like that.
Yes, there are several platforms. I really like a platform called 11 Labs. 11, E-L-E-V-E-N, Labs. They have a free version and a paid version, and heaps of different voices to choose from. It's very cool.
Okay, amazing. One last question that came up about Apple Podcasts. Apple is more of a pain to join because you have to have an Apple phone or tablet or something.
Yeah.
Is it worth making the effort? I know you can connect via another channel.
Apple Podcasts recently created like a version of it that you can access from Windows and Google phones. I would say yes. I think that 50% of podcast listeners listen on Apple Podcasts, 50% listen on Spotify. I think it is worth being on Apple.
Okay, amazing. Great. Wow, Zev. So thank you so much for being our special guest today, and to Israel Story and Liat and to Mishi, and a big thank you to you for being our main host today in terms of sharing the basics behind our brand, our story, and what's going on with podcasting. How do people, if people want to get hold of you? Of course, if you join us with the 3-session series, then you'll have Zev at your fingertips, should we say, because he's going to be running some of the sessions, not all of them, and you'll be able to actually unmute and ask yourself a lot more questions and ask him. How can people reach you, though, if they have any questions in the meantime?
You can send an email to contact@israelstory.org.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. So thank you for joining. Thank you to our listeners, whether you joined live as a live participant or whether you're watching the replay. This session was hosted by the Israel Networking Hub as well as Israel Story. I'm Lesley Kaplan. We look forward to seeing you, those of you that are going to join us, and for those of you that are going to be joining our other events. Have a great, safe day, and thank you once again to all of you, especially to Zev and to Liat and to the entire Israel Story team. Bye-bye for now.